thanks to the leadership of President Trump. The USMCA in particular is a major win for our two countries and for America's workers. Under the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, more than 4 million manufacturing jobs will be regained that were lost under NAFTA. This will be a huge influx of American jobs that were lost under the failed NAFTA trade deal that went into effect. In addition, tens of thousands of manufacturing plants were lost because of NAFTA. We want to bring those on shore, and the USMCA will go a long way in bringing back those manufacturing plants and those millions of jobs that were lost under NAFTA. NAFTA was a bad deal for the American worker because it left American workers behind. Many politicians forgot the damage wrought by disastrous trade deals such as NAFTA, but President Trump did not forget. It took this president to change the status quo, renegotiate NAFTA, and secure a better deal for the American worker. And here's why. The USMCA alone will create 176,000 American jobs. We believe the other trade deals that this president has negotiated will add to that number and help undo a lot of what NAFTA has done. The USMCA will boost American manufacturing, including wages, new jobs, and exports. And the USMCA will create 76,000 auto manufacturing jobs, crucial to the well-being of this country. The USMCA is good for business. As President Trump rebuilds the strongest, most inclusive economy in history, the USMCA will help jumpstart our economy. The USMCA is projected to increase GDP by $235 billion. This means jobs, jobs, jobs. And during today's meeting between the presidents, one official from Mexico noted that many considered the USMCA an 80-20 probability. Now it is 100% certainty. And with that, I'll take questions. Yes?
Okay, two questions for you. The first is, President Trump hasn't taken questions from White House reporters in 2 weeks. While we always enjoy talking to you, this White House likes to say the president is the most accessible in history, so why hasn't he answered questions for 2 weeks amid a pandemic?
This president routinely answers questions. He's more accessible than any of his predecessors. I'm sure you'll be hearing from him soon. He's always up to the job, but he's hard at work in the Oval Office.
And also, is the administration retaliating against Dr. Fauci for publicly contradicting the president? Today, he was told to come here to the White House for the task force meeting, which meant he could not answer questions from reporters.
Look, that's a decision for the task force as to who appears at the briefings, but you've heard from a lot of our doctors. Today you heard from Dr. Birx. Dr. Fauci's appeared on 6 TV programs since June 1st. You just heard from him in a task force briefing on June 26th, and he participated in the Vice President's governor's briefing on COVID-19 on June 29th. So you've heard from him recently, along with the rest of our doctors in the past 5 days. Dr. Hahn's been on TV 6 times as well.
Does the president still have confidence in Dr. Fauci?
The president has confidence in the conclusions of our medical experts, but it's up to him to determine what to do with that information and to take what we hear from Dr. Fauci, Dr. Birx, and others, and take what he values in their opinion and come to the ultimate consensus that's best for this country.
Kate? I have 2 questions as well. One, what is it exactly in the CDC guidelines that the president doesn't like?
Yeah, so the CDC guidelines that the president mentioned today, I would note that it was emphasized by Dr. Redfield that he doesn't want these guidelines to be a reason for schools to not reopen. They're not requirements and they're not prescriptive, and that's per the CDC director.
Right, but what is it that the president thinks is too strict and too expensive and too impractical, as I think the word is?
So one of the things is in the guidelines, which I would note that in these guidelines there are 28 implicit acknowledgments that these guidelines aren't even feasible. 18 times it's mentioned that some of this might not be possible, and 9 times it's mentioned that some of this might not be feasible. So that's embedded into the guidelines, and one specific example I'll give you is on food services. Have children bring their own meals as feasible. Well, there are 22 million children in this country who depend on these meals at schools, who depend on access to nutrition in schools. So that's one example.
So is that just one thing that the president doesn't like? Is there anything else?
Well, there are several that are in there, but we need to make sure as the American...
I'm wondering what they're going to change is my point, really.
Well, you'll see, because as the Vice President said, the CDC will come out with new guidelines, additional guidelines. There will be, I think, 5, he said, and you'll see those when they come out.
Okay, so my second question, just really quickly, is the president and the CDC clearly don't seem to be on the same page on what the guidance is, what he is hoping they put out, what the CDC is actually putting out. So why doesn't the president just go to these task force meetings so then he can talk about it with them? Because Our reporting is that he hasn't been to one since April.
So I would note that the CDC is very much on the same page as the president, which is why you heard the CDC director today underscore these are not prescriptive, these are not requirements, and that there will be supplemental guidelines. So they are on the same page. The president's routinely briefed about the coronavirus each and every day. The relevant information is brought to him on the big decisions, and then he moves forward in the way that's best for our country. Jill.
Every day.
Thanks, Haley. So just following up on those new CDC guidelines that we're told are coming out next week, did the White House pressure the CDC to change public health guidelines that were reached in accordance with medical professionals because the president doesn't like them?
No, not at all. But the president made his opinion quite clear publicly this morning on Twitter for all to see. And we would note that guidelines, and I would underscore the American Academy of Pediatrics, because it is an organization that's made up of 67,000 pediatricians that they represent. They are very adamant about kids needing to go back to school, and they said school policies must be flexible and nimble in responding to new information, and administrators must be willing to refine approaches when specific policies are not working. Policies should be practical, feasible, and appropriate for child and adolescent development stage.
Is the president against social distancing guidelines in school, things that are included in those guidelines now, like placing desks apart from each other, staggering school times? Is he against those elements of it?
So I'm not going to get into each and every element and where he stands on it. The president wants us to go back to school safely. Our children depend on it. These schools are essential, and I think he stands on the side of parents across this country who want to see their kids back in school, who want to see make sure that their kids don't fall behind in education. Yes, Christine.
Thank you, Kaylee. By this point in the 2016 campaign, President Trump had been talking about what would ultimately become the USMCA for more than 9 months. So when do you think we can expect President Trump to detail his priorities for a second term?
I think you hear him talk about it quite often. More trade deals are on the horizon from this president, lower taxes, more funding for our schools. One announcement that I do have for you is that in CARES Act 4, he's looking to substantially bump up money for education, but at the same time understand that this money should go to students. So that's one priority we're looking at more in the immediate term, supporting our schools, supporting our families. He's talked about payouts, stimulus payouts to Americans that worked very well the first time. It's something he's mentioned for a phase 4. He's talked about payroll tax holiday, which would be a big tax break for America's workers. So those are a few in the immediate term, and you'll be hearing a lot more about a second term in the coming months.
Do you think he might detail some of those priorities in his speech this Saturday at the rally in New Hampshire?
So I don't want to get ahead of his speech this Saturday, but you'll certainly be hearing in coming speeches more about the president's vision for the second term. Building the economy is one thing that he mentioned just this week. You know, he brought the hottest economy in modern history once. He wants to do it again. He did that through deregulation, through lower taxes, and that led to historic low unemployment for Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, disabled, our veterans, and those are the kind of policies, conservative policies he's looking at for a second term.
And anything that you could say to Republicans on Capitol Hill who have talked to reporters and said that they would like President Trump to perhaps be a bit more forceful about what exactly he would intend to do?
Well, the president's been very clear. I mean, I just mentioned to you what he wants in CARES Act 4. He's mentioned some other things, so I think he's very vocal about what he wants, and you'll be hearing more from him. Justin.
Thanks. I have one on Hong Kong, but I first wanted to just follow on the rally question. Just before you came out, the director of the Tulsa Health Department said that the president's rally very likely contributed to a surge in coronavirus cases in the city. We know that allies and advisors of the president also have tested positive since Tulsa, and in New Hampshire, masks are recommended but not required. So I'm wondering, first, why the president continues not to require masks at his rallies, considering we've seen the public health outcomes that come from it, and whether that or other changes are something that he might look at going forward.
The president's been operating in accordance with CDC guidelines, recommended but not required. But as he said recently, if he weren't tested every day and he was in a situation where he couldn't distance, he would wear masks. We hand them out. They're handed out by the campaign, rather, at these events, and there's ample hand sanitizer, and it's people's individual choice as to whether to go.
Do you have a response to the Tulsa Health Director sort of
I would just say I have no data to indicate that on my end, but it's the decision of individuals whether to go. We encourage the wearing of masks. As the president said, if he couldn't distance, he would, but it's the individual choice of the person.
And then on Hong Kong, I know the Chief of Staff and National Security Advisor have talked in the last couple of days indicating that the president might both signed the bill that was passed by Congress last week and hinted at additional action. So I'm wondering both if you have any updated guidance on the timing of those things, but also we've heard concern from U.S. companies that sort of aggressive sanctions that would be unlocked under the latest bill could hurt their businesses in Hong Kong and China. And so I'm wondering if you could kind of talk through the administration's thoughts about balancing how aggressively you would be sanctioning Chinese officials versus U.S. business interests.
So I'm not going to get ahead of the president on what our actions on China will be, but you will be hearing about some upcoming actions that pertain to China, so I can confirm that. Yes.
Yes. Thank you, Kaylee. So still on Hong Kong, this morning Robert O'Brien said that China has basically annexed Hong Kong. Can you explain what he means by that and what the administration plans to do about it?
I think his words are quite clear. We've been quite clear from this podium that Hong Kong's special status is at risk because of the Chinese actions.
So, just to follow up on annexation, what are the administration's plans on actual plans of annexation from the Israeli on parts of the West Bank?
So I won't get ahead of the president on those actions. Yes. Jeff.
Thanks, Kaylee. You mentioned education before. The president said in his tweet this morning that he might take funding away. First of all,